Thank you so much, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're at in the country. But welcome to our Welcoming Economies 101 webinar. We're so excited that you're here, helping us kick off the Welcoming Economies 2022 program. So during today's webinar, we will cover the following. We'll go over some welcoming and introductions. We'll do a small group activity. We will cover some welcoming economies models. We will have our guest presenter from University YMCA share how to tackle this locally. We'll have a small group activity, a second small group activity, and then we will review some resources and share a survey with you all. So today's objectives include thinking through a mainstream economic developer's lens, connecting immigrant inclusion strategies to that lens, becoming familiar with welcoming economies models, walking away with ideas for local partnership, and introducing the Welcoming Economies 2022 webinar training series. So next, I'd like to share a little bit more about Welcoming America. For those of you who may not know, Welcoming America is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that leads a movement of inclusive communities becoming more prosperous by ensuring that everyone belongs. We believe that all people, including immigrants, are valued contributors and vital to the success of our communities and shared future. The Welcoming Network is composed of over 300 nonprofits and local governments working to build more inclusive and welcoming communities in the United States and abroad. Led by Welcoming America, the Welcoming Network is both a network and a movement driven by the conviction that communities make better decisions when residents of all backgrounds, identities, and perspectives are meaningfully engaged. Through the network, we work to change systems and culture by providing communities the roadmap they need to create welcoming policies and share new approaches to inclusion that creates an environment where everyone can truly thrive. So the Welcoming Standard captures the core of what it means to be an inclusive community. It was developed in collaboration with local governments, advocates, and diverse experts, and also with input from the public at large. The Welcoming Standard provides a comprehensive roadmap for immigrant inclusion and welcoming efforts. So the standard addresses a range of essential policies and programs from language access to hiring practices. The Welcoming Standard is organized by our framework categories: government and community leadership, civic engagement, equitable access, education, connected communities, economic development, and safe communities. And so one of the areas that we're going to dive into of the Welcoming Standard is our economic development framework area. So economic development is critical, especially as a part of any regional strategy for immigrant inclusion, and can also be the framework or orientation for investing in immigrant inclusion work. The why, the case. In welcoming communities, all residents, including immigrants, can participate fully in their economy, and that is the goal of this program in really supporting local practitioners. So the economic development framework sets benchmarks around workforce and economic development infrastructure to address the priorities and needs of immigrant residents and immigrant job seekers. It helps to ensure that programs support entrepreneurship, business development, and workforce development while establishing accessibility to all residents, including immigrants. So next, I'm going to hand it over to Steve Tabachman from Global Detroit.
Hey, it's great to see so many friends and some newcomers as well on this Welcoming Economies 101 webinar, and excited about the year ahead as we will be doing more opportunities to talk about how to build welcoming economies and inclusive economic development. Global Detroit is a regional economic development engine that leverages talent, ingenuity, entrepreneurial spirit, and the determination of immigrants in Metro Detroit's regional economic recovery and growth. We run a range of programs that run the gamut from talent and international student retention to entrepreneurship to working in neighborhoods and helping immigrant families accessing opportunities. We were created 13 years ago with support from the Detroit Regional Chamber of Commerce, as well as our philanthropic community, and really sort of pioneered a multi-sector approach of tackling immigrant economic inclusion, and work with a variety of partners, from the city's Office of Immigrant Affairs and Detroit City Council Immigration Task Force to folks working on a regional level. Each of our 4 counties that we serve have some form of an immigrant welcoming or economic inclusion. And of course, we're fortunate to be here in the state of Michigan, where we have an Office of Global Michigan. So you can go to the next slide. So are you doing this, George, or am I doing this one?
Feel free to take it away.
Okay, I'll jump in. So because there's about 30 people on the chat, rather than doing introductions and calling on you individually, we'd love for you to put in the chat your name, what do you do, where are you calling from today, and maybe what you're most excited to learn about. And if you could just chat everyone in there, I will put that I'm Steve Tabachman. I'm the Executive Director of Global Detroit, and I'm calling actually from Berkeley, California today. And I'm excited to meet new people. So if you guys could put that in the chat for yourselves, then we could see some about who's here and what you're hoping to learn or get from today. Again, who you are, what do you do, where you're calling from, and what you hope to learn on today's Welcoming Economies 101 webinar. You see Betsy Cohen and Sloan Herrick from South Carolina. The Global Detroit team is spread out across the country. Certainly only 3 of us excited to be here today, wanting to learn anything. If you could please add to the chat. So we're going to be doing a series of webinars over the latter half of the year. We're also hoping to get connected if you're going to Welcoming Interactive, but part of this network and this learning is really to connect with your colleagues from across the country, so that you all are experts in your own communities and have a lot to offer each other. So I see Niken Carpenter from Erie, Haley from Portland, Maine, Marcella in New York City, Susan Herman, it's been a while, great to see you, at Asia and Akron and Cleveland, Julie from Southeastern Utah, Dina from Virginia, George, of course, from Welcome America in Austin, Texas now, Gloria, Yen, our friend from Champaign, Illinois, Lisa, a good friend of ours from South Bend, Rocio, Katie, great. So you can see great group of people today. So we can go back to the slides and you guys can be scrolling through that while we continue to move forward. We're just trying to make up a lot of time. So next slide. All right, so the Welcoming Economies 101 webinar, and by 101 we mean sort of the introductory webinar, is really to how to activate immigrant economic development initiatives in your region. And as practitioners and policymakers, we often approach this question by considering what assets immigrants bring and what barriers exist to immigrants integrating from an economic perspective, what it means, what challenges they face finding jobs, starting a business, et cetera. And what programs can we develop that fill the gaps? And but before we get into those specific programs, we really want to think, and we even think about immigrants, we really want to understand our region's economic developers and the economic developers. Sometimes I'll use the term mainstream. I know we need a better term than that, but what I mean are the economic developers, at your chambers of commerce, at your local economic development agency, and your mayor and county executive offices, at major corporate leaders. Some of those folks actually may be thinking through immigration, but our experience has been, by and large, they're really not, and except for like in the Sun Belt where you're on the border states, they're often not thinking about immigrants when they're thinking about the region. And so we're going to start by thinking about what do they care about and what is the perspective that they have. When we understand that perspective, we find that the immigrant inclusion and economic development initiatives that we want to launch can be framed in a way to connect with this larger economic view for the region in ways that are more sustainable, that draw more resources, and that have more impact. And so that's where we like to start. You can go to the next slide. So again, we're going to start this with a small group activity. And the next activity requires us to step back. And this is going to be, as we hope all our webinars are, much more participatory than just us talking about, strategies and best practices, but really let you engage with the work from your own local perspective. And I want to underscore this in everything we talk about in Welcoming Economies. What is right in St. Louis is right for St. Louis, and that may or may not be right for Detroit. It may or may not be right for Champaign-Urbana. And what's right for your community is going to depend on your community. It's going to depend on your leadership. It's going to depend on who you have at the table, the resources. So this work overall is customized to your own local organization, your own local context. But we do think everyone can start by stepping back and looking at the economic developers, chambers of commerce, and other local leaders who are might not necessarily be thinking about immigrants and refugees. So in a second, we're going to break into smaller groups, and you're going to have 3 questions to work from. And you all were emailed a worksheet for you to fill out. And if not, you'll just need a blank piece of paper because the questions are not that long, but it's helpful if you have the worksheet. And you're going to work out these answers individually. And we don't want you to answer the question from the view of a refugee resettlement agency or from your cross-sector immigrant economic development, immigrant welcoming initiative. We suppose that you are at lunch with the head of the Chamber of Commerce, the head of your economic development corporation, the head of one of your larger corporations, your mayor, your county executive, your city council president. And we want you to answer the questions in this first round from that perspective. So with that, can we go to the questions now? So there are 3 questions that we want you to think about. The first is, what is the existing economic development and job creation strategies for your region? So if you were to ask the head of your local economic development, like, what's your plan? What are you working on? What is the number one strategy to create economic growth and prosperity in the region? What are the answers that she is going to give? Like, you want to answer from that perspective. The second question will be, what are the major assets of your regional economy? What are the strong spots? Detroit, we have rich automotive heritage. We have great universities. We're on a border with Canada. Those kinds of things are the things that you're going to want to tap into. And then the last question is, what are the challenges that your regional economy faces? What are the barriers to job creation and economic development? Frankly, the nice thing is that in today, equity might show up on these answers. That probably wasn't the case for most places 3-4 years ago. That's a wonderful thing. And so, if that's what your chamber and economic development and local leadership are talking about, you can add those things, absolutely. But it's rare that they're going to come in and say, frankly, the new refugee families from Afghanistan, that's a major asset to our region. Not many economic development leaders are talking that way in the country yet. We'll get there. So with that, we're going to break in for 15 minutes with small groups, and then we're going to come back together, and each group has a facilitator from either Global Detroit or Welcoming America, and that person will do the report out for your group, so you don't have to waste time figuring out who is doing the reporting.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you all for participating in that group activity. I guess I can call on the facilitators just to give us a quick share out of what you all were hearing in your group. So I guess we can start off with Sloan, if you don't mind.
I'd be happy to kick us off. Thanks, George. Well, we had a great group, and I don't know how we did it, but we had 2 people from Utah and then Salem, Massachusetts. And I find it always interesting going into these conversations because a couple of themes emerged, right? We talked about sort of housing constraints, whether it's the cost of housing or zoning issues around housing and all of the barriers that anyone can face in navigating housing, but particularly immigrants and refugees as they're looking for spaces to land. So we talked about that as a constraint specifically. Almost all of our participants brought up some really promising economic development strategies to support small business owners and really thought about that as an asset to their communities, because the small business owners are from all over the world, and there's such an opportunity to build them up and better connect them to the resources that are already available. So we're hoping that we have the same group when we break out next time, George. I'm just planting that seed because we're getting to know each other. We didn't quite have enough time.
Thanks, Sloan. Next, I'll pass it over to Jordan.
Well, I would echo that as well, Sloan. I think our team was the best team, so hopefully we'll be together again. Some of the things we talked about, there was a consensus that just overall the need for workers right now is being seen and felt by a lot of folks. I would invite folks that were in my group to throw in the chat the things that you put in the chat during our breakout. There were some really neat programs that were mentioned, especially a couple around connecting people to mentors and others that are in the field, knowing that a lot of times when we think about assets, we think about capital, we think about training, and yet connections is sometimes left out of that equation. So some really neat programs that were happening. Group, feel free to put those in the chat for others to take a look at. And then we briefly talked about some barriers, one of them being transportation to jobs, and yet at the same time, while that's a barrier, there's some neat work happening where businesses are actually stepping up to provide van pools for employees to get to work. And we would love to have more time to finish out the rest.
Thanks, Jordan. Next, I'll pass it over to Olivia.
Thank you, George. It's wild that everyone thought they had the best group, because that's just obviously untrue, because they weren't in the same group as me. I do want to say we had a really fascinating conversation because all of the communities within the group are similar in that they are not the major city for their region, but they've seen a lot of population inflow due to the pandemic. So folks are leaving New York and Boston and moving to Portland, Maine, for example. So we see these higher salaries coming in, and then perhaps the population that was there beforehand is moving out in search of those higher salaries. So sort of retaining local talent, growing your population without displacing folks who've been there for generations. It was a pretty interesting conversation, and I hope we get to continue it.
Olivia, I'll pass it over to Steve.
Great. Well, we had an awesome group. I'm not going to say we're the best or somebody's not the best. I'm more politic than that. But we were really diverse in the sense that we had Austin, Texas, St. Louis, Missouri, Erie, Pennsylvania, Charlotte, North Carolina in the house. And so it was people from Akron, Cleveland in the house as well. So a very bunch of different cities. A bunch of folks said that, big business and tech were big strategies for their regions. And we talked a little bit about the shortcomings sometimes with that, how that can leave people out of the economy. And that there were some assets like the biomedical corridor in Cleveland, Akron, like the logistics and warehousing industry in St. Louis. Obviously, we all know that Austin is weird and has a great tech sector. But then what was interesting is one of our smaller communities in Erie, actually the Afghan arrivals was seen as a strength and acknowledged strength by leadership, not just by people working on refugees. In a city that lost 3,000 residents, they had 500 new Afghan family folks arrive. And so that was something that was really embraced. And so we were just wrestling with these insights of some of us weren't sure what our regional leadership, what the strategy was. Some of us thought, well, maybe I knew before COVID, but after COVID, I'd really have to check back in because I don't know if those programs are running or not. So that's where we were at.
Thanks, Steve. And my group, we discussed a lot of what has been brought up as well. It was really great to hear the assets that people identified for their regional economic development, what that looks like, whether that be a medical center, whether that be a 5-county, manufacturing hub, thinking about Transportation was one thing that came up as an obstacle, thinking about brain drain and how our aging population and some of the gaps that exist there and what the incentives are for local communities to really bring in and want to welcome immigrants into their economic or workforce. And yeah, just really thinking about what gaps exist between formalized structures around, economic development plans and the engagement and relationship building that needs to occur for there to be alignment with, the formal structures as well as the more informal, which would be those relationships. So thank you so much, everyone, for participating. We will have another breakout activity later on in the webinar, but for now, let me go back to sharing my screen. And I'll pass it back over to Steve.
Great. So now we're going to start talking about models of welcoming economies. And I'm going to talk for probably too long, and then you're going to hear from Gloria again from Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, and you're going to wish that, why did Steve talk so long, and why didn't we get to hear more wisdom from Gloria, because she has done some amazing things. But we didn't build in any breaks to this webinar. We're packing in what sometimes we use 2.5 hours in person to do in 90 minutes. So know that we're going to get out hopefully at 3:30. And so we're just going to keep plugging forward. So you can go to the next slide. But really what I'm going to do is that over the last 15 years in particular, we have seen local economic development initiatives, chambers of commerce, but also mayors, nonprofits, et cetera, really understand that immigration has been a real contributor to regional economic strength and to the diversity and the prosperity of their home region. And a series of new strategies have emerged to build better economic integration and welcoming of immigrants into our regional economies. And we're going to cover what some of these innovations have been. But the thing I want to stress is, as you're sort of hearing about what we would consider to be best practices, is that the best practice for your region is the one that you feel is the best practice that makes the most sense, that is an alignment of what we just went through, what your assets are, what your challenges are, where leadership is in your region, the resources that you have, the community that you're serving, where there is funding available, that is what should determine, what makes the most sense. If you're in a rural area and you don't have a great research university in your backyard, doing international student retention for high-skilled STEM is probably not the right fit for you. Some of these strategies might make a lot of sense, but if for some reason you have a mayor that is not embracing immigrants and refugees, and what we've described is inherently a program that needs the municipal government engaged, it's probably not the right program for you. So we encourage you, as you develop what is your agenda locally, to think through, like, where are your partners, what makes the most sense, not to necessarily, people often say, well, what do I do? What's the first thing I should do? And the reality is that you should figure out what works best in your region. All right, let's go to the first section. So I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about entrepreneurship, and there's a strong case for thinking about immigrant inclusion of entrepreneurs and small businesses, that it's a very much a win-win regional economic strategy, that even some of the most conservative folks in America who have all kinds of considerations, reservations, I'd even say outright racism sometimes, in not supporting immigrant communities, sometimes are very supportive of immigrant entrepreneurs and see entrepreneurship as a uniquely American necessity. I'm going to give you an overview of some models, but then also some thoughts about how to start a program. So first, let's go to some of the case making stuff. Go to the next slide. George, can you advance the slide? There we go. So this is a little bit old, but it's some research done by the Fiscal Policy Institute and the American Society Council of the Americas in New York about a decade ago, that looked at Main Street businesses in America. Immigrants make up about 13% of the foreign or the population. They comprise about 16% of the labor force. they're about 18%. So they're about 50% more represented in the in the business owners. But when we get to Main Street business owners, and what do we mean by Main Street? It's exactly what you think: restaurants, coffee shops, grocery stores, dry cleaners, the kinds of things that make a, retail that makes an urban area or just a downtown or even a small rural town makes it operate. They comprise 28% of the business owners across America. So heavily overrepresented in a community that sometimes is not connected. Can we go to the next slide? I think I have all the right slides. Actually, let's go back to the Main Street, because let's stick with Main Street before we get into tech. So when we talk about Main Street, there are a variety of programs that I'm going to get into. But one of the things that we often talk about, and entrepreneurship's we could be talking about workforce right now. We could be talking about community college access. We could be talking about careers in healthcare. We could be talking about housing issues, as I know one group was. In all of these areas, we often talk on the biggest common denominator is language access in cultural competence. How are we creating access to opportunity in ways that our immigrant communities can access it linguistically? And how are these services being delivered in ways that are culturally competent? Let me give you some examples of entrepreneurship programs that don't fit that. Maybe your small business training and technical assistance programs are only offered in English, right? So one would be just expanding the languages, or maybe providing translation. Maybe all the providers only speak English and it's too much to ask them to hire other languages, but you can arm the entrepreneur or the small business owner with a translator to come get access to this. Cultural competence. Sometimes we'll see that to get the assistance folks need, they have to go to a bank, they have to go maybe onto a university campus that is far away from their neighborhood. If they're in a community with large numbers of undocumented, those are not safe places. They may only want to go to their community. How do we bring the supports that folks need into their business, into their neighborhood, and we make them accessible? Culturally competent. Maybe the program right now is only offered at night, and you targeted the month of April. Well, it's Ramadan. That might make that your entire Muslim community is not going to be attending your small business training because you've done it during a period of their holiday where they're going to be, breaking their fast and celebrating. So, so those are the two big core components, and we could go through those components in every single area of entrepreneurship. Economic integration, whether it's housing, whether it's workforce, language access, cultural competence. The second piece is just how do we decide how we're going to support small business owners? So there are some different orders. I'm going to get to a comprehensive model that does business planning, that does technical assistance, that does small business lending, that does focus on neighborhood development all in one package. But that's a very expensive and sometimes hard to launch. And so many of you are doing a broader welcoming initiative in your community, and you're asking, well, how can I support small business owners? The first order would be to talk to your existing entrepreneurship programs. Who is supporting small business? Is there a small business association, administration office, a small business development center, universities, independent nonprofits, Main Street programs, community development financial institutions or CDFIs, business associations? How are they relating to immigrant small business owners? You want to work with them and maybe just convene them. Maybe you guys, as the welcoming initiative, you simply convene those folks and say, do you know who our immigrant entrepreneurs are? Are you serving them? What would you need? Have you thought through language access, cultural competence? So just convening and having a conversation with the providers is one way. And a second strategy is to convene the small business owners and entrepreneurs themselves, and then to connect them to the opportunities. So let's just say the Paycheck Protection Program rolled out during the middle of the pandemic. And this is an opportunity for a forgivable loan for businesses. And you may have had lots of banks that were offering to be lenders for the PPP program. You may need to translate that, the invitation to that, but you may, in Global Detroit's case, go door to door or use networks that exist, because door to door people weren't open, right? So you may need to use phone calls, internets. I think Gloria will talk a lot more about this, about their success at getting their Chinese restaurant owners and others engaged in PPP through really taking program opportunities to entrepreneurs or bringing entrepreneurs individually to program opportunities. A third order model would be just to be a case management model, where you're working one-on-one with immigrant small business owners and you're helping them get whatever they need. You meet with that business owner, you find out what they need. Do they need a loan? Do they need to hire more? Are they having problems with city regulations? Do they need more training? What is it that they need? And then you work with that person individually to help them. And then the fourth is what we would call this sort of more comprehensive model. A number of Welcoming America members overlap with a network called the Build From Within Alliance. Certainly Global Detroit, we created a comprehensive model. It's known as Prosperous Detroit. It focuses on individual business owners in low-income communities of color. It works both in rural areas and in urban areas. It offers business planning classes, one-on-one technical assistance, what we call character-based lending. So lending where not even CDFIs or nonprofit lenders will go. We'll lend without any kind of collateral if we believe in the person, that kind of stuff. And then we focus on real estate. So how do we get these? We target specific areas, sometimes immigrant communities, sometimes neighborhoods, and continue to move that forward. So just in the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving through these because I want to make sure there's time for Gloria. So can we go to the next slide? So I went deep in the entrepreneurship because I know that's where a lot of people start. Here's another case building that immigrants are disproportionately represented in the high-tech startup community. So it's a quarter of all the high-tech firms across the country, 50% in Silicon Valley. Next slide. And actually more than half of the billion-dollar, what we call unicorns. I do want to recommend a Welcoming America publication that Global Detroit helped write called Seeds of Growth, which you can find on their website. This goes through all the various small business ideas. I think there's, I don't remember if there's 18 or 25 different ideas to think through welcoming to find your model. But you can start working with small businesses as simple as literally convening the small businesses and or convening your providers and starting to have conversations without worrying about necessarily raising a bunch of resources to have full-time staff to do a comprehensive model. All right, let's go to the next one. A few of our members are working with startups. This is a program, Global Entrepreneurs in Residence, or Global EIR, that connects startup founders who face a visa barrier, connects them with university part-time jobs as an onboarding ramp for them to launch their ideas here in the US. And then they transition long-term as the company grows to something else. Next slide. That's just one of the companies that we've supported at Global Detroit. You can go to the next one. Now I'm moving into more the talent and the workforce. So international student retention, and certainly in our group, we talked about tech and about talent. And so one of the things is that most people don't realize is that we have over 1 million international students studying in American colleges and universities. Next slide. And they predominate the high-skilled STEM fields. So this chart, which is a little bit old, but it largely holds up, shows you the percentage of graduate students, so people getting masters or PhDs in critical STEM fields that are international students. 80% of the electrical engineering students getting masters or PhDs in America are international students, 4 out of every 5. 75% of the computer science students. So when our big business and economic developers talk about, we need to have more tech jobs, we need to land the Googles and the Microsoft offices and the local LinkedIn office and, do a bunch of programming and coding, the people who are going to fill those jobs, the next generation of them are in our universities, and they are largely international students. And there are some opportunities for them to work after graduation on their student visas that you guys can help pioneer. Again, language access is not an issue here because these are folks that come to study in English, so they already have that. There are cultural competence issues, but simply convening, reaching out to the International Student Office at your local university and or convening employers and talking through, do you hire international student talent? Are you aware that, these huge disproportionate numbers, it can be as simple as that. Next slide. You'll see St. Louis Mosaic, I think, on that slide. Also Global Detroit, I know Global Cleveland. Those are some of the members of the Welcoming America Network that are doing international student retention programs. This could be as simple as having an international student job fair where you're reaching out to your international students and employers and connecting them. At Global Detroit, we do an intensive soft skill training for our international students. At St. Louis Mosaic, they also do sort of a mentoring network. So there's some really low cost ways to get involved here. Next slide. As you can tell, I'm moving through this quite quickly. So then there's workforce development and what some folks might call skilled immigrant integration. Obviously, that's a term with some, I think, some value about who's skilled and unskilled. I would say everybody is skilled in our economy, certainly our agricultural workers, our manufacturing workers, those in service industry jobs are skilled, but typically in economic development, when people use the term skilled, they mean a 4-year college degree or more. And so there are a variety of programs, if you go to the next slide, that focus on skilled immigrant integration. These are some of the local ones here in Michigan. Our State Office of Global Michigan has a called the MITS program, and the Welcoming Center for New Pennsylvanians has a leading program. These are programs that help underemployed college degreed immigrants. So you arrive as a refugee, maybe you had some training, a college degree, and maybe nursing or engineering, but you're having a hard time connecting with that field in this country. And now you're driving an Uber, or maybe you're working in retail. How do we connect you with the field for which you're trained? And there's some really wonderful programs and national providers in this area that can really help. There is a coalition called Imprint, IMPRINT, for immigrant professional integration, made up of World Education Services Global Talent Bridge, or West Global Talent Bridge, which is a partner organization that works with lots of Welcoming America members to help them launch programs in this area. There's a national provider called Upwardly Global that also has got modules that individual immigrants and refugees can tap into to prepare them for jobs in their fields. Welcome Back works in the healthcare field. There are other members of the Imprint network. Next slide. So then we have other workforce initiatives that go for those who don't have a college degree. Next slide. In Syracuse, there is the work train model that really is a dual client approach, meaning that it works with both immigrants and refugees as one set of clients, and then industry and employers as the other set of clients, and tries to match needs and skill sets and does its workforce in that way. Again, I come back to language access and cultural competence. It's almost the exact same frame as what you would do around entrepreneurship. What are your local workforce agencies doing? You could convene them as a first step. Are they creating programs that are linguistically accessible? And are they offering programs that are culturally competent? And then you could get into talking to your immigrants and refugees and find out what they need. You could be a guide for helping them one-on-one access these mainstream programs, similar to that case management model. Or you could get into very specific training programs that work with immigrant and refugees in particular areas. Next slide. Some of those programs focus on contextualized English. This is a program in Boston that it provides English trainers to any employer that wants to offer contextualized ESL programs, and insists that employers provide the training, that they pay the people while they're on work to come to the training, and the program will pay for the actual curriculum and the trainer to skill them up in their field. And that's just the contextualized English program. Next one. And then there are a series of community colleges that are working to make community colleges more accessible, particularly for undocumented students, for students who also as a second strategy for those who might have training and education abroad. I'm going to go to the next one. I'm just trying to move through these as quickly as possible. And you'll see we have guides beyond this that you'll be able to follow up on some of these strategies. Home ownership is another strategy, and I obviously came up in Sloan's group about wanting to house people. And so again, the strategies here, you can go to the next slide, can include meeting with local housing providers, home ownership providers. Are they providing things that are linguistically accessible, language access, and culturally competent? A big issue here is the undocumented. We no longer, most of our affordable housing programs are focused on home ownership, focused on getting a mortgage. Yet since the 9/11 attacks and some a law that was passed called Know Your Borrower regulations, was an anti-terrorism provision, but it means that most lenders will no longer lend to somebody who has, either an ITIN number or a W-2 number that doesn't match their tax return number, which is common among working undocumented people who have resources to pay a mortgage. So sometimes people have innovated and looked at working with local land banks and other strategies to help immigrants become homeowners. Next slide. And finally, agriculture has played, and that is one that I'm sure in our group, I think Ramona had to leave, but it sounded like in Charlotte, she is very much working with a very diverse group of people who come from their home country with strong agricultural traditions and using sort of urban gardens to grow things and create income as entrepreneurs around those programs. This is true both in rural and urban areas. And with that, I think that's just an example of the New Roots program that the IRC has used with refugee communities. Keep going, George. Is this for me or do we do a handoff here? I'm sorry.
Yes, we will do a handoff here, and we will switch into our guest speaker presentation. So thank you so much, Steve, for running through that. As Steve mentioned, we will be following up with everyone who's registered, and we will make sure to send out links to all of the resources that were mentioned, as many as we can, and then also identify those from our resource library to make sure that you all have those links readily available. So again, thank you so much, Steve. Next, we're going to be hearing from our guest speaker, who comes from Champaign-Urbana in Illinois, and her name is Gloria Yen. She's the director of the New American Welcome Center at the University Y, and she's here to share her experience in economic development. So I will stop sharing my screen and allow for Gloria to introduce herself and to share her screen.
Thanks, George. Can you enable participant screen sharing, please?
Yes.
I just want to say that Gloria comes from a YMCA and has been amazing at adopting all these crazy ideas and whatever. And so I think she speaks to where maybe some of you are who maybe don't come from an economic development organization, and how do you get involved in Welcome Economies, which is why we asked her to speak.
George. All right, so my name is Gloria and I come from the University YMCA in Champaign County, Illinois. In 2017, we were designated by YMCA of the USA as one of 17 New American Welcome Centers nationwide. It was a pilot project to see how YMCAs across the country could be responsive to the changing demographics of their communities. And so each and every day through our Welcome Center here in Champaign County, what we do is we try to make our community a place where all immigrants can thrive and flourish. We do this by engaging local institutions, mobilizing community resources to ensure equitable access to services, to economic opportunity, and also to meaningful belonging. As Steve was saying earlier, none of the things that we're doing are prescriptive. One of the things that I really enjoy doing, and I was scribbling down as everyone was talking and sharing both in our breakout sessions, but also in the open session, is just learning from a lot of ideas and strategies from all across the country and figuring out how we can adapt them into our local context. So a little bit about our overall work. So you have that context of my work before I go into the economic development area, is that we offer a blend of direct and referral services, many of which are listed here, from a multilingual immigrant helpline to immigration legal services and assistance to various types of supports for families and youth, like a tutoring program. We connect people to resources regardless of how long they've been here, and we try to do it in the language that they speak or are most comfortable with. In addition to the provision of direct services, we also play the role of a community convener. So we bring a lot of local stakeholders together, from local municipalities, from nonprofits, from the schools, from the university, etc., all with the purpose of advancing immigrant inclusion through joint efforts. And so some of these efforts in the past have looked like getting together around increasing the count around the census, for example, for 2020. More recently, it's been around COVID mitigation, and you'll hear about some of our economic development joint efforts. Our team, Steve just spoke a lot about language access and the importance of cultural competency. We worked really hard to make sure that our team is reflective of the primary populations and constituencies that we serve. So our team is a blend of first and second generation immigrants from China, from Taiwan, from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, from Mexico, and from Guatemala. And we also, of course, work with US born residents as well. Shortly after we were designated as a New American Welcome Center by YMCA of the USA in 2017, we applied for and were selected as a Gateways for Growth awardee by Welcoming America and the New American Economy. And what that allowed us to do was to really tap into some research support and technical assistance to publish a customized research report on the economic and demographic impact of immigrants in our community. And so these weren't the numbers from our 2018 report. These are numbers that you see on the screen from the 2020 census, but it was a great tool for us to start educating and informing our community members about just how much of the workforce and the local labor force that our immigrant communities were a part of, what were their specific financial contributions. And not only that, the report helped us to catalyze a lot of conversations around what's going well, that's great, but what are some of the challenges and barriers that continue to persist, and how can we work together on them? And so there was interest and partnership with our local economic development corporation to see how we could advance this with some other partners already working in this space. And so what that allowed us to do in 2019 was to apply to host Steve for a workshop in our community. And that's what happened during Welcoming Week of 2019. Pictured in this photo, you see folks in our community from the chamber, from the local cities, from other business associations, from local nonprofits, et cetera. And folks in the room came together to look at that data from the report, but also to learn about some of the very strategies that Steve just shared. And this really got folks thinking about how can we continue working together and collaborating for the long term. And some of the folks in this room went on to form the nucleus of a working group around economic integration and employment that later developed recommendations that would become our Champaign County Welcoming Plan. Moving on from 2019, we applied to become a member of the first cohort of the Welcoming Economies pilot. And this allowed us to connect with our peers in Louisville and Pittsburgh to really think about and innovate and iterate around inclusive and diverse economic practices. To be honest, we didn't really know what we were doing when we entered this. We just knew that we wanted, that it was important, that our stakeholders recognized it was important, and we were just kind of going into it blind, knowing that we would get fantastic technical assistance, that we would be exposed to a lot of different types of models, and that we would have a good network of support as we were experimenting and developing. And that became really, really important because shortly after we joined that pilot cohort, the pandemic hit. And as part of the pilot, we decided at the Welcome Center to form an internal business response team because we wanted to assess and support the needs of immigrant businesses in this time that were reaching out to us. We wanted to be viewed as an access point by them, as a trusted connector to link them with some of the business support associations already existing in the community, but didn't necessarily have language capacity, for example. And we also wanted to use this as an opportunity for us to establish our credibility and visibility with local institutions in the community. And so when the pandemic hit, in order to figure out what specifically was going on and what areas specifically to focus on, we actually spent several weeks interviewing and listening to different businesses. And typically businesses prior to this round of engagement, they're really busy, right? Business owners and entrepreneurs are going 100 miles per hour. They don't necessarily want to stop and pause and talk, but if a global pandemic hits and their revenue sources are completely stripped. They're looking for resources, they're looking for information, they're looking for capital. And so we were able to use this as an opportunity to build relationship and to build trust and to understand the priorities of local entrepreneurs. And so some of the findings that we had from that survey, you see illustrated on the slide, and you also see from the breakdown of the pie chart that a lot of the businesses that we worked with are those very overrepresented Main Street businesses that Steve was talking about earlier. In response to what we learned from the survey, we were able to distribute, first of all, a summary of our findings, both to local and state partners who then use that data to advocate for business grants that would support minority-owned businesses in CARES relief, for example. We also started doing virtual roundtables to connect business owners to the Small Business Development Center, for example, or to other local business associations. And also I think more importantly, to one another, to know that they weren't alone, that they weren't isolated, and that there were other folks trying to figure out how to navigate it. We did a lot of translation of information of different sorts of business resources like PPP, the EIDL Advance, et cetera. And we shared them in language specific WhatsApp and Facebook groups. We also helped business owners communicate about their changes in their hours and whether pickup was available and where pickup was done and where takeout could be done by helping them set up their Facebook pages and helping them update their Google listings or highlighting them on social media during Welcoming Week in 2022, which was our first and hopefully only solely virtual Welcoming Week. We were able to conduct a special showcase featuring deals and discounts from many of the different businesses that we worked with. And in addition to doing just kind of like communications campaigns on our end, we also looked for opportunities to nominate the business owners that we were working with for local awards from like the Chamber or from the Economic Development Corporation, for example, or the Tourism Bureau to further raise their visibility. Many of the businesses, as you saw from that data slide, 83% were hurting for financial assistance, but they were very reluctant to take on loans, and there was a lot of misinformation or just lack of information or understanding around grant programs and how those worked. And so we worked one-on-one with many individuals to help them understand and complete grant assistance applications, and our team helped 30 businesses secure over $550,000 in relief over the course of the pandemic. And I think that was the most the biggest success in terms of trust building. Like, yes, we were doing these roundtables. Yes, we were doing this like visibility raising, et cetera. But many business owners continued to be wary of us. Like, why do you keep calling us? Or why do you keep visiting? And why do you keep emailing us? And like, sure, we'll take this information. But I think that the fact that we showed up week after week with information, with resources, checking in on, updates from our last conversation, and most importantly, the fact that we were able to connect people to capital literally built currency and trust with the business owners that we were working with. And it was a slow and frustrating effort, just to be frank, for our staff. That took a long time to see and yield fruit, but I think that the effort was definitely worthwhile. And we continue the work today through the implementation of our Champaign County Welcoming Plan, which we released last September. And what we're trying to do is build a community of welcoming where all of us have an equal opportunity to thrive. And the welcoming plan was crafted through extensive input from lots of different community stakeholders, including, pictured on this slide, survey input from over 80 employers in our community, both immigrant and US born, to learn about the different challenges that they face with regard to recruiting, to hiring, and retention of foreign-born employees, so that we could develop and craft recommendations and strategies in the area of economic integration and employment. And so what we're currently doing right now is we're preparing to launch communities of practice for the summer for implementation, and we're also working to secure as much funding as possible. And so to date, we have secured $250,000 in funds from the American Rescue Plan at the county level to support mental health and language access for immigrants in our community. And tonight, I'm actually going before our county board again to ask for additional funds to support small businesses. And we're hoping that The things listed on this slide are some of the things that they'd be willing to support, from interest rate subsidies to essentially buy down the interest rate that can be as high as like 9 to 14% at local CDFIs or other lenders, to business association memberships, to give folks exposure to mainstream networking with other business owners, and also help business associations in our community kind of get more exposure to build cultural competence and understand that they need to change and respond with their staffing, et cetera. And so these are some of the things that we've been working on over the past 5 years. And if folks often ask for a secret sauce, and I think that one important factor of our secret sauce that hopefully we can hear through the slides is that, like, you cannot get enough good things from this cohort. And you cannot get enough good things from Welcoming America and Global Detroit in terms of like really thoughtful practitioners who have built decades of experience, who are connected to fantastic models across the country and are always kind of ready with like, try this resource, look at this report, et cetera. So that's hopefully that wasn't too long.
That was perfect. Thank you so much, Gloria. In the interest of time, we will actually be switching over from our second group activity to a quick Q&A to potentially field any questions that you all might have for Gloria and the amazing work that they're doing through the New American Welcome Center in Champaign-Urbana. And I'll also pass it over to Steve as well.
Well, as you all are thinking, it just, Gloria, really stands out to me that this economic development work came to you in such an interesting way. And I think that's the point we're trying to drive home so frequently, is that you don't have to be an expert in economic development strategies to do this work. Just learning about what's out there and where the gaps are, you can be sort of a trusted connector in that space. And you guys have really gone about this in many different ways, but I just wanted to thank you for sharing. It's so nice to hear a real live example.
Lori, what would your top advice be for folks who are coming from a background like a YMCA to this work? Where do they start?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Sloan. I think that, think about what your why is good at, or what your organization is good at. What are your current strengths? Like, we knew that we were good at identifying and responding to community need in the immigrant community. We knew that we had done that before with our helpline. We had done that before in immigration legal services. We had done that with our community navigators programs. So we knew that we had staff, talent, and capacity to respond to community members. And we just had to figure out, how do we then leverage those resources? So in terms of like where to start, I would say, like, look at your staff team, look at their strengths, look at your current programming, and think about, how can this potentially be adapted or expanded to partner with existing initiatives in the community? And so after you do that internal assessment, making that external assessment of like, who are the natural partners and allies in the community, who is already running programs that maybe are absolutely fantastic, but just not accessible to immigrants, whether that's because of a lack of network, a lack of visibility, lack of language access, institutional trust, what have you. I think those are, I don't know, 2 places to start.
So before we hand it over to Jordan Crumroy from Welcoming America to kind of go through some additional publications and resources and opportunities for you all to access, are there questions about any of the models we put up there, questions for Gloria, thoughts, observations that you all have? We're going to not do our second breakout, which was really designed to sort of say, which of these models that were just put up there did you find most enticing and appealing? Where do you see those models maybe exploring for your own local community? So if anybody, something pops out that you thought, oh man, that's really interesting, I wonder if we should be doing that here, please share with us. Happy to talk to you more about it.
I'd also just quickly add that data is very important. That's why I had so many slides on data. I would say that I personally was pretty skeptical in terms of why are we spending so much time trying to create this report on data we can just like share out in a presentation. But when people had the literal report in their hands, it like changed the conversation in our community. It changed who was coming to the table. And it opened doors for us to give presentations before boards, before faith communities, before schools and in classrooms, et cetera, in a way that I never would have expected or anticipated. And so I really took, or our team really took the lessons that we learned from that release of the initial economic and demographic impact report and said, like, how can we tell the story with data? And that was one of the reasons that we really wanted to make sure that in the surveying of businesses that we did during the pandemic, we weren't only capturing things in a qualitative manner, but we were quantifying it so that we could share it back out with partners who could then be like, whoa, you talked to 40 businesses. That's actually a lot. Maybe we should listen to the particular concerns affecting immigrant-owned businesses in the community.
I love that you add that, Gloria, because I do think there's such power in sort of the broad scope data and then undergirding it with a story of an entrepreneur or a story of a person whose circumstances were changed because of these connections. And I think those two things paired together are just a really powerful force.
One of the powers, I think, of Welcoming America and the network is having really done deep research on what moves people, and when the data can move people who are your allies and already supporters and getting them into action, and when the narrative story about a particular individual, refugee family, etc., can move maybe some folks who are really not, skeptical or downright hostile to immigrant communities, but they can hear that human story, and they've really studied these issues, and there's lots of communication tools in the Welcome America Network to mine that. So without any questions or commentary, I'm going to I think we're going to turn the mic over to Jordan to talk about other resources to explore welcoming economies.
Great, thanks so much, Steve. So just to finish things up, want to point you to some resources that you can dig into for next steps. So first of all, if you go to our website, welcomingamerica.org, you can click at the top, it'll say resources. And then from that, you can search a whole host of keywords. You can also make certain selections if you want to look at toolkits or webinars. It is a hotspot for a wealth of information. So definitely encourage you to take a look at the resources there. One example of that resource is the Guide to Immigrant Economic Development. And this was written by Steve Tabachman, who you just heard from. And it's really an encyclopedia of programs and strategies. And very similarly, the Welcoming Economies Playbook is kind of a condensed version written by Global Detroit and Welcoming America. And you'll also see Seeds of Growth and some community planning process guides and a lot more resources that we think would be really helpful. You might also want to visit weglobalnetwork.org for more reports and just economic case making. One program I did want to shout out is Gateways for Growth. If you aren't familiar, you can simply go to gatewaysforgrowth.org. And this is a program Welcoming America has been running since 2016 with our friends who were known as New American Economy and have now merged with the American Immigration Council. I bring this to you because we will be launching another cohort at the end of this year. So you've got time to read about it, look into it, and see if it might be a good fit for you. You heard Gloria speak about it as well. And this is really a competitive opportunity for both private and public sectors to apply jointly for a couple different levels of support. One being a customized economic research report. Gloria mentioned kind of the importance of data, right? And so being able to understand the local immigration contributions to your economy. And the second one is tailored technical assistance to help you create a immigrant welcoming plan. We've supported about 71 localities throughout the course of our program. And again, we'll be launching this at the end of next year. In this next slide, you'll see the Welcoming Economies webinar lineup for the rest of the year. This information will be emailed to you soon, so you don't have to scramble to write this down. But we definitely invite you to attend as many of these as you can. Each month we'll have a different topic, so you can invite your colleagues to ones that you think they might benefit from. If you're interested in more things like that, our interactive is our annual conference, and it'll be hosted in just a month in Charlotte, North Carolina. We expect about 300 to 400 people coming together for sessions to really dive into topics like this. You can see that on our website as well. A couple sessions that you might find interesting. One of them is asset building in underserved communities, looking at how to access and break down barriers and how to build trust. And another one is pathways for success, local workforce development strategies to support immigrants and refugees. If you're a member, you likely receive a discount, if not free registration for that conference. So be sure to reach out to your point of contact at Welcoming America. And then lastly, you will get a survey after today just to tell us a little bit about what you enjoyed, what you thought we could do better. This is the first of many more to come. And so we would love to have that feedback from you all, and you should see it in the chat as well. So that's it for today. We thank you so much for being part of this. We hope you'll reach out to us either directly via email. You've got our information here on the screen. And we hope to see you all in Charlotte, where I know Steve will be, I will be, our Welcoming America team will be, and we hope that you will be there as well. So thank you all, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.